Absolutely.
What's up, everybody? We're back with another solo episode. Let's talk UFC 321. A bit of a disaster.
This fight is declared no contest. I can't see.
If Tom quit or not. Because this is the thing, when you're a fighter, especially a high-level fighter, he knows that parading around the cage and saying, I can't see, the fight is 100% going to get stopped. Oh, let's move on. Our boy, Albanese, went over to the White House the other day. Went over to meet good old President Trump. Kevin Rudd was in the audience. He got roasted by accident. While we are talking about Albanese, the first home buyer scheme, you know, the future of this country and the future of the housing crisis. All right, let's start the show, Carl. Are you ready? Audio sounds good? Everything rocking and rolling?
Absolutely.
What's up, everybody? We're back with another solo episode. No guests today. We've got Carl, producer Carl, and me. We're going to talk about some news. We're going to talk about what's going on. We had the UFC over the weekend. Yeah, we got some cool stuff to talk about, actually, Carl. It's good today. How have you been?
Oh, very good. Very good.
That's good.
Pretty chaotic, but, you know, what can you do?
What can you do? Well, first story of the night. It's always good to kick off the start of the night with some GYG. And what did we see in Melbourne this week? Carl, pull up this article for the people at home. This is absolutely classic. Never seen this before. I've ordered thousands of dollars worth of GYG, and I've never seen this before in the store. Let's have a look at this. Guzman Gomez employee slammed for standing on grill to clean range hood at Melbourne restaurant. There was a funnier headline than this, though, Carl. Remember, there was a headline that said GYG employee slammed for standing on grill with his shoes on. And because Carl sent, yeah, this is the video I saw. Play this for the people at home.
Popular food chain GYG is investigating after a worker was filmed standing on the grill with his shoes on. Footage captured at the Brunswick restaurant in Melbourne shows the worker is wearing shoes and appears to be on the hot plate while cleaning the vents above.
That's enough, Carl. That's enough. Turn it off.
The internet into
Turn
a
that off.
frenzy over health and safety.
That's classic. How else is he going to clean those things up there? You know what I mean? But no, that's not acceptable. We can't be having that. But the funniest thing about this whole story was the original headline that you sent me over text said he was standing on the grill with his shoes on. And they emphasized with his shoes on like it made it so much worse. But as you pointed out, what was he meant to do? Stand on there with his bare feet?
Yeah.
Where'd you even find that, Carl? When did you even find out about that?
Oh, it was quite... It was quite a reasonable amount of time ago now, but because I remember it coming on the news, like maybe a good month or two ago, I reckon, and it was crazy because it was on the news, and I know that how much you love GYG, and it's just funny because I've heard so much about GYG while we've been on kind of like this adventure or whatever, and all throughout all the episodes as. And I like it as a common theme.
Yeah, it's cool.
Like so it's very interesting kind of how but yeah, as you said, you sort of go, I mean, you could imagine how commonplace this probably is. And because I do a lot of work where we go through kitchens and we do inspections and stuff.
Yeah.
Just obviously doing all the fire and electrical stuff, but it's very commonplace where people try and almost forget that when they get food from restaurants, the kitchens aren't always really the cleanest back there. It might look clean from the front. Dude,
I've done DoorDash before. Yeah. I used to do DoorDash for 2 or 3 years. And I remember going to those kitchens of restaurants that I'd consider fancy restaurants, good joints. And you go back there and go, holy moly, this is what the kitchen looks like. I'm never eating here again. Yeah. And I feel like they might all look like that. I'm just naive to it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But experiences like that, you know, they open your perspective up.
It opens your eyes.
But you know what you mentioned at the start where you talked about this show having themes that carry through the episodes and GYG being one of those. That's really fun. And I really like, you know, the aspect of themes carrying on through the show. And people bring those on and we bring them to the show, you and I. And I think these solo episodes are an opportunity to bring up stuff that we like talking about and just rant and talk about cool stuff. But speaking of cool stuff, let's hop right into it. Let's talk UFC 321. A bit of a disaster for the UFC. Main event fight doesn't go the way that they want. First of all, what did you think, Carl? Where were you when you saw the main event, and what did you think initially?
Yeah, so I was literally just at home. I watched it a day after, and I found it pretty crazy. Even just looking at some of the updates, like after in the aftermath, with Tom Aspinall's dad talking about like kind of what might need to change. Because realistically, I know that you've seen a lot of the stuff where Yuri Prohaska, I think he had a really bad eye poke against Jamal Hill, and that and it
I
didn't.
actually don't recall that.
Yeah,
I
I think
remember that,
it's
but I'll
against
take
Jamal
you. What?
Hill.
Yes, yes, yes.
The reporter like asked him about it after, and he obviously gave a typical Yuri response of kind of just like, I see with one eye, so I see everything because I can fight blind, basically, something along those lines. And so obviously very funny, typical Yuri response, but it does take you deeper into question of like how that might affect you like later with how important your vision is, and the fact that there really isn't any actualized punishment for this type of kind of stuff, where you could see that for the whole kind of first like round, for how long the fight started, Cyril Gane was just constantly like really putting his fingers out there and making sure that like even when Tom looked like he was kind of going for a takedown, the fingers were like right there trying to stop him almost from getting close. And you can't really be fighting like that, I think, because that eye pokes don't really happen that often, and especially like a double eye poke where it's like really precise or whatever, like where it's kind of just right there. And obviously this time it's had serious consequences.
Yeah,
Kind
yeah,
of
big title fight. Tom hasn't fought in a long time. This was sort of meant to be kind of his homecoming, and completely ruined, right?
Yeah.
And in a situation where it looked like John Jones sort of got embarrassed, now it's the other way around. John Jones somehow won the situation now that this has happened, right?
Yeah.
Because if Tom comes out and knocks out Gane in the first round, right, John Jones still looks like a big idiot, because it's like, you're not the best heavyweight. There's this other guy, and like, that would have happened to you, John. That's what everyone would be saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But now with this eye poke, John could have done that.
Yeah.
John could have gone out there and eye poked. He's done it a bunch of times before. So, look, that's where we are. But as you said, I think there's kind of multiple ways that we could have a look at this situation, how it went in the title fight. We could talk about the like prevalence of eye pokes, the gloves, and what they need to do to try and prevent this from happening in the future. But what I think is more interesting and more fun to talk about is if Tom quit or not. And this, I don't want to, because this is the thing, right? In that situation, you have no idea what Tom's vision's really like. But I know what it is like to get poked in the eye while fighting, and it absolutely sucks.
Yeah.
And I think I sort of know what happened to Tom, because when you do get poked in the eye, especially really hard, as you would see in the video, if we could pull up the video of Tom holding his eye, he doesn't let go of his eye. He doesn't let go of his eye the whole time, and it's because he can't, because he's in so much pain. I know how that feels. Like, you can't even, it's not that you can't see, it's that you're literally paralyzed. And when it comes to your eyes, I've had this happen to me before, for sure. You start to panic because your eyes, as you said, are super important, and we're very vulnerable about our eyes. And I reckon this happened to Tom. He was in the octagon, he got poked, his eye was freaking out. He couldn't use it, he couldn't see, it was hurting, he couldn't even remove pressure from it. Because that's when you do get poked in the eye like that, the only thing that relieves how much it's hurting is just putting constant pressure on it, and just like essentially just being
trying to shield it.
yeah, being in like so much pain. You don't want anything to get to it because you're just dying, right? And that's what looked like was happening to Tom. And when that sort of starts to happen, panic can set in, and that's when he was pacing around the cage. Because this is the thing, when you're a fighter, especially a high-level fighter, he knows that parading around the cage and saying, I can't see, the fight is 100% going to get stopped. So, he didn't really seem like he was giving himself a chance to recover and get better, because he also knows that he has 5 minutes. He's got 5 minutes to recover, and he can go from there. And initially, when I was watching the UFC with my brother on the TV just the other day, we thought the fight was going to continue, because we saw the eye poke and we realized that his eyes were actually closed, because the eye poke is exactly like this, right? His eyes were closed, but both fingers go in, and then there's a bit of a grip, and then it comes out, right? That looks a bit strange, but that's what happened, right? If you watch a replay, that's exactly what happened. But Go ahead and pull up. I want you to pull up this too so the fans can see it. I want you to pull up DC getting poked in the eye by Stipe Miocic, right? And you'll see the difference in eye pokes because in DC's eye poke, he gets eye poked by Miocic. It goes right into the eyeball, directly under the eye shield, directly right in there. And as Tom said in his speech, that's the definition of knuckle deep. You should really see this eye poke. And DC, in a heavyweight championship fight that he was losing more than Tom was losing, he continued. So you have to go, Tom, should you have continued? What's the game? But I think, all those questions are great in hindsight. Hopefully we see this fight rescheduled in another 2 months. But I did want you to try and pull that DC fight up for us, Carl.
Yeah.
And so we could have a look at the comparison. It's really, it's in my opinion, it's important.
Just seems it just.
Yep, no doubt.
Boom!
Give me, no, I can't see it. Give me kicks. Daniel, you got
Okay, hold on.
Sit down, my friend.
Cormier and Miocic battle for.
Okay,
ultimate
pause.
glory in the
So, what happened was the sequence of this, because that all happened very fast, right? Cormier got poked in the eye mid-fight. He said to Mark Goddard, the referee, "I've been poked." He just poked me in the eye. And he made him keep fighting. So he didn't even the fight didn't get stopped for any amount of time. They just had to keep fighting. And then DC got to the stool and was complaining. And Mark Goddard came up and reaffirmed it. You didn't get poked. It was a punch. And then after the fight, they obviously show the replay and see that footage. But go to the scroll bar here, Carl. And I want to give people a still frame of the eye poke. So where is it? Yes, stop just there. So as long as that doesn't play, this perfectly illustrates my point. You can see his finger is right underneath his eyelid. It actually goes into his eye. And if you see a photo of DC after the fight, his eye, it looks like he can't see out of that eye. It looks cooked. So that is what we're talking about in terms of like spectrum of eye pokes, right? That's some of the worst I've seen, right? That's some of the worst I've seen. So you have to go, okay, Tom's was like way less than that. And he had 5 minutes and stopped fighting after a first round in a fight that was relatively close. DC could have called this off and said, "I'm done, whatever, this is bullshit." But he didn't. This was his last fight. This was his retirement fight that he actually ended up losing, and which sort of forced him out of the UFC. And if this was, if he stopped and said, I want a rematch, it might have been different for him, right? But he kept fighting because, as the champ or as the challenger, maybe that's what you're meant to do. That's why we have these big events. That's why, thousands of people flew to Abu Dhabi to watch you compete. Now look, that's all well and good when you're not poked in the eye, holding it, unable to let go because it's like inexcruciably painful, right? And there's big consequences. Cyril Gane has knockout power. You do not want to be with one eye, because people don't necessarily understand. People that are probably still watching are more or less maybe fight fans, but people who are just regular people who don't understand, as soon as you lose vision in one eye, your depth perception goes away, which is terrible for fighting because that's what it's all about, especially if you're talking about giant consequences like in the UFC's heavyweight division. And you're talking about Cyril Gane, one of the best strikers of all time in the heavyweight division of the UFC. He's incredible, and what he could have done to Tom if he kept fighting, we don't know because it didn't happen. But let's have a look. Let's have a look here because even in the interview, he didn't let go of his eye. Talking about
guys, I just got poked knuckle deep in the eyeball. Why are you booing? What am I supposed to do about it? I didn't do the poke. I can't see.
Tom, they should not be booing. I agree with.
But I felt, and like even before this, when he was running around the cage, I can't see, blah blah blah, swearing and stuff. That's very I think that it talks to my point a little bit too, where Tom was panicking a little bit because it's such a vulnerable thing, and he was wigging out. And even in the ambulance and the videos that have come out after about his dad talking about it, and it was like a traumatic experience and things. I feel mixed ways about that. I sort of let it just happen. Like they came out and said that there's no long-term damage to his eye. His eye's going to be fine, blah, blah, blah. So how much longer are we going to milk this cow? Surely just do the rematch and get that booked in and sort this out because Tom needs this to go away ASAP. If I was Tom, as soon as my eye's better, I'm doing that rematch because I think Tom Aspinall is better than Cyril Gane. Oh, and Tom Aspinall sort of gets a chance to redo that first round because I wouldn't say he wasn't getting beat. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go as far to say that. But people were saying that. People were saying that Cyril Gane won the first round decisively. But I wouldn't say that. He got touched up a few times and his nose was busted and he was bleeding. First time we've seen blood on Tom, which is huge. But I wouldn't say he was getting beat. But this rematch gives him another opportunity at the first round that he, has dreamed of, I guess, which is the finish, because he's finished a lot of his fights in the first round. You wouldn't be surprised if he's got some weapons that he knows he can finish the fight with in the first round. But
that's an interesting point, especially to the fact that obviously people saying, oh yeah, like he was getting touched up, he lost that first round from what was happening, and you'd have to say no way. But what I would say as well is that for that first round, I reckon as well that the fact that Gane, he was actually doing that same motion before the poke happened.
Yes.
He did that same motion on Tom's face quite a lot of times, and the match didn't go on for very long. And for the amount of time that he did that, that sort of moment, and it was actually touching his face and stuff and getting close to the eyes.
Yeah.
For the amount of times that he did it in the time span, you can imagine that would disrupt your sort of rhythm quite extensively, because obviously it's an illegal move, and if you're kind of always having this coming at you, I would actually say that might have stopped Tom from being able to really actually get into his rhythm and stuff.
Yeah.
And because it was an illegal move that ended up stopping the fight anyway, any one of those other could have ended the fight.
Yeah.
From him doing that. And I think that might be why the first round, Tom just didn't really get going, because Gane was basically using an illegal move.
Yeah.
But I hope I've explained that.
No, I hear you. And who knows, you're talking about, Cyril Gane was doing a lot of this.
Yeah.
Maybe he was getting trained by John Jones before the Aspinall fight. Who knows? But let's pull up the card and let's see what other fights were on that card, because there was some other. Yeah, we had the Mackenzie Dern fight, the Mackenzie Dern win, the championship fight. For the strawweight, in my opinion, interim strawweight title. Wei Li, going up to fight Shevchenko at Madison Square Garden later in the month is a big fight. So, but Zhang Wei Li, she's the true champion of strawweight. And if, Zhang Wei Li was to lose and come back down to strawweight and fight Mackenzie Dern, I think she wipes the floor with her. Because Zhang Wei Li's cracked. She's the best strawweight we've ever had in UFC, in my opinion. And what she's been able to accomplish, and I think she poses a legit problem for Shevchenko. She really does, and she's been on a terrific run in the last couple of years. She's amazing. She, even as a female mixed martial artist, she's a true inspiration to me. She really is.
You know what's interesting? I don't know if you've heard a lot about her training and all that, but she actually is heavily invested in this guy who is the massive proponent away from the typical main fitness industry of lifting weights to improve athletes. He's a fascia specialist.
Okay.
Obviously, with fascia basically being the elastic kind of force that allows you to transfer pressure from different parts of your body.
The fast twitch, really.
Yeah. And depending on how good of an athlete you are, typically your fascial connections will be so much better if you're extremely athletic to someone who isn't, where it starts from your foot, where I'll kind of get myself up here, but it starts from your foot basically hitting the ground, where you can have foot stiffness for the fascia, and as soon as you're planting your foot on the ground, it immediately goes directly up to your glute, so that you then get a much faster and better way to store all the pressure, because obviously your glutes is the biggest muscle in your body pretty much. And the fact that these athletes who are actually some of the best in their fields and stuff, they will always have this kind of foot to glute connection that is instant, where most people will almost cramp up by overusing their calves and being on their tippy toes, especially for fighters.
I didn't even think about that.
Where and if you can imagine, for most people, right, if they tried to do what that athlete who has such a great connection from their feet to their glutes, it immediately shoots up as soon as so it means that their calves won't get tired because their glutes will never get tired from bouncing around because most of the pressure and stuff goes to their glutes immediately, even from them being on the balls of their feet. And so, and that's what fascia, the role that it plays. It can kind of, that's why some people get like compartment syndrome in their calves.
Okay.
Because the pressure builds up after them, like, because their calves are taking too much of the strain.
Yes.
And that's why they kind of get all that pain and pressure in their calves.
Mm-hmm.
But you can kind of help your fascia start gliding because the fascia sits kind of around and in between your muscles.
Okay.
And it can act as like a spring. Whereas most people, like, they're, if they were to kind of stay on the balls of their feet, they might actually get injured in their, like, ankle, foot, just because they can't handle it because they're not storing the pressure equally. Like, whereas all their pressure is almost in the ankle.
Yes, gotcha.
And, like, hopefully that was explained well. But, yeah, she, that athlete, the mixed martial artist...
Zhang Wei Li, yeah.
Zhang Wei Li, she does this training with this specific dude who focuses specifically on fascia. And she doesn't really do any legit weight training. She does all the fighting and all this fascia training. And it's called, like, HFT, hyperarch, like, fascia training.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about, like, kind of just, like, the movement of allowing your fascia to kind of glide and getting a better connection between your feet as your base and being able to have a connection with almost your glutes and your core. Because it makes sense logically.
100%. And, you know, with, you know, amateur fighting experience, that makes complete sense. Your balance, your center of gravity, all that plays a huge deal.
Exactly.
And being, you know, flexible and being able to use all your weapons and understanding where you are on balance and when you aren't, and how, you know, how that perceives your opponent, all that is super important.
Exactly.
And like she even does like crazy like holds and stretches and tai chi. She's very into like that Asian style of mixed martial arts, which I really think is fascinating. And like a lot of Bruce Lee inspiration in her style, like a lot of that, and I think that's really cool. But we also had the Umar Nurmagomedov fight. In my opinion, a bit of a boring fight. Like, you know, Batista actually dropped the best moment of that fight was Batista dropping Umar with a knee in the first round. That was a huge moment. It looked like he was going to finish him. And it, you know, Umar ended up recovering with a good decision win in the end. You know, a classic, technically sound mixed martial arts fight, but nothing to, you know, run home about. Let's see who else we had on this card, Carl. Let's just scroll down for me just 1 second. Let's see who else we had. That Alexander Volkov fight and Jailton Almeida fight was terrible.
I know.
So boring. Almeida, look, there's so much controversy with this fight too. I don't even want to talk about it because Cyril Gane and Volkov fought 6 months ago. And Volkov should have won that fight. But he got robbed of the decision.
Exactly.
So what happened in this fight is Almeida dominated him on the ground, but he didn't ground and pound him. He wasn't really looking for submissions. It was a very boring fight. So what the judges did is they ended up giving the fight to Volkov, which fans are now saying is, you know, a bit of a sympathy win because of because of the fact that they robbed him last fight. What do you think of?
That's like the big thing, right? Where from what I watched, I have to admit that I would almost be giving it to Volkov anyway. And you know I'm no expert.
Yes.
But it was the fact that even though he was like dominating on the ground, he got off so much more damage than Almeida. Almeida basically did nothing.
He did nothing. He was just able to get the takedowns really easily.
But it was weird because so many times, that's why you make a great point about the fact that it was very boring. Because even though Almeida was very good at getting him to the ground, he would actually stall in a lot of these positions. He would just stick his head in just stay.
Yeah. Like, and you can't afford to do that if you're in the, you know, top 5 in the UFC heavyweight division.
Exactly.
And I know maybe this shouldn't be how it works, but it is. Your title shot contention is going to be based on how entertaining you are, right? We see it time and time again. It took Magomed Ankalaev 12-fight win streak to get a title shot. It took Merab Dvalishvili 11-fight win streak to get a title shot. Conor McGregor, it takes 6-fight win streak, you know.
Exactly.
Ilya Topuria, it takes 7-fight win streak. It's not the same. If you're exciting, you have knockout power, you finish fights, etc. And you know, now we're seeing Merab start to finish fights and build that into his game.
Exactly.
And hopefully with Almeida's skill set, he starts to do the same. But this is what's so crazy about Almeida. He used to be able to do that. He used to be able to do amazing ground and pound and finish guys and have great submission skills. And I don't know why he wasn't testing much of that out against Volkov. Yeah. Maybe it was because he was taking a lot of damage on the feet, so he wanted to make sure he secured the position, not take any risk. But I'm not mad about this. Volkov ends up losing out anyway because the main event ends in such a terrible way, and there's going to be a rematch there. Now what does Volkov do? Who knows? All I know is that my Serbian brothers shed a tear. We shed a tear on Sunday because Alexander Rakic got knocked out.
Yeah, dude. The professional. Dude, he is so professional.
Bro, this guy is built like my uncle, bro.
I know.
And he's tearing through the best of the best. This is insane.
He's unstoppable.
It's insane. You know what I mean? Like, this guy, Azamat Murzakanov, is nuking guys. He slept Rakic with a jab.
Yeah.
Like, with a jab. Okay, can we try and pull up the fight for the fans? I don't want to pull up the fight for anything technical or any of that shit. I just want to pull up the fight for the fans so they know the difference in size and body when it comes to these two fighters. Rakic, who got knocked out, looks like he's made out of stone. 6'4", jacked, amazing technical fighter out of Serbia. And Murzakan, even just these graphics is perfect, Carl. Murzakan, I'll go the full screen just like we saw before. Like, even that picture's do it. That's doing him favors right there.
Yeah.
He didn't look like that on Fight Night. On Fight Night, he looked another 12-pack of donuts heavier than that.
Oh, exactly.
But dude, look, it's just, you know, he's undefeated. He's won almost all his fights by knockout, and he's done it again. And I'm hating him on him a little bit because he did it to Rakic, and I love Rakic. But you know, he's a real problem, and you know that. And this is the real problem for the UFC. If we're talking about problems, who do we? That's not him. If the fans saw that, that's funny.
No,
but,
they didn't.
He's not the real. The real problem is, what do we do now? Right? We've got Pereira, who just beat Ankalaev. We got a couple options. Do we give him the Olberg fight? Do we give him this Murzakanov fight? Do we give him what's the other fight? The Yuri fight. Right? So many options at light heavyweight now. And look, Olberg, what does it need to be? Does it need to be Yuri Prohaska versus Pereira 3 and Olberg versus Murzakanov for the number one contender? That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But Olberg probably doesn't want to fight again for the number one contender. He probably thinks he is the number one contender. But after a performance like this, undefeated record, this guy's on absolute fire. He looks like the next champ. Him versus Pereira would do insane numbers. Like, you know, you got to give the guy a shot. So we'll see. We'll see. More on that to come, I guess. But let's move on, Carl. We got some other stuff to talk about because our boy Albanese went over to the White House the other day. He went over to meet good old President Trump. We should talk about that because that's pretty fun. Right?
Absolutely.
And like, I think, you know, people had a lot of expectations of what was going to happen when he got over there, but more or less it was, you know, uneventful. It was almost a bit of a glazing festival. If people saw the meeting, it went really well. Donald Trump was saying that like, oh, you know, Albanese's done so well, blah, blah, blah. I think it's just like they're kind of just showing face. Yeah, exactly. Just doing what needs to be done in the moment. And neither of which was willing to press the other on issues that they really believed in and mattered. Even a reporter during the interview said, like, what about things that you differ on, like DEI and climate change? And Albanese shut that all down really quickly. Not because, you know, not because of his views or anything like that, just because he probably didn't want to start that stuff with Trump at the White House while everything's going so good. You know, but there's a few things that we should talk about. There was a few things coming out of that meeting that was helpful. The $8.5 billion critical rare mineral export deal, that's huge. So Australia, the US, $8.5 billion. As many of you know, it's been in the headlines for, you know, a couple of weeks now. China has this massive monopoly when it comes to rare earth minerals, 95% monopoly essentially on the whole world. This deal is to try and counteract that, build some Western support for rare earth infrastructure and resources. So Australia is going to be processing, digging up the rare stuff itself. And yeah, that's a really big deal. Because we've had the capacity to do this for a long time, but we haven't necessarily enacted on it. And I think right now it makes a lot of sense given China's position to be able to put this forward and to do this. Another thing that was hot off the press, top of mind for Trump, was the AUKUS deal, the 8 nuclear submarines as well. And look, that was sort of obvious that was going to come up. It was in the news a lot at the start of this year. It's been one of the main talking points between the US and Australia for the last 12 months or so. What I was interested in though was how the rhetoric changed, because these submarines were sort of to bolster Australia and US alliance and defense and to protect us both. However, in this new meeting that we had the other day, it was very much hinted that these nuclear subs will be used if, China starts acting up and wants to take Taiwan. Australia is going to need to get involved and to use these AUKUS subs if that happens. And that's what Trump was talking about. And look, for most of these conflicts that we talk about on this show, or that people talk about in, everyday life with Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. Not to say blah, 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 that they don't matter, but there's hundreds of conflicts going on around the world. Australia is almost involved in none of them, right? But, Trump's saying, hey, now it's time for you guys to be involved in something that's, broadly in your region. That should be a point of warning for people, at least a little bit. If Trump's thinking like that, he's not thinking like that for no reason. It's a possibility that this is to happen. And if it is a possibility that is to happen, he would expect Australian involvement, at least to the extent of these nuclear submarines. Does Australian involvement in a potential war with China end there? I don't know, but this would be nice questions for Albanese to ask the Prime Minister, to ask the President. But he didn't. He just sat there and agreed with everything he said. Exactly. Because what are you going to do? Are you going to press Trump over these things? He's going to destroy you. Yeah. Albanese is nowhere near as good as a communicator as Trump is. And I know a lot of people, especially in Australia, would go, Albanese is a better politician than Trump. I hate Trump. He's very inflammatory, blah, blah, blah. Say what you want to say. If you open your mouth near Trump and you aren't ready and it isn't tight, you're in trouble, because he's coming to roast you and he holds grudges. He's one of the pettiest humans alive, Donald Trump. Say what you will about him, good and bad. He is one of the pettiest individuals that's ever graced American politics. And, in this case, it wouldn't be much different with Albanese. And it'd make quick work with him, I reckon.
Oh, absolutely.
But, that's, I think, the thing about this meeting that was interesting to me. It wasn't about what was discussed. It was about what wasn't discussed. It was very clear that this meeting sort of felt like it was about this critical resource deal. It was about AUKUS, and it wasn't really about a whole lot else. Australia wasn't really working hard because Australia got hit with tariffs just like everybody else, and for a country that we consider our partner, our neighbor. You could argue that's unfair. And, a lot of people in Australia would say that's unfair. A lot of people who sell exports to the US, a lot of people who, do steel and aluminium manufacturing, which got hit with big tariffs earlier in the year, beef exporters, the list goes on. Very niche industries, but these people exist in Australia. Does Albanese have a right to stand up for them when he goes to the White House and he's got one opportunity with the guy that could actually change things? Maybe he does. But, is he going to get roasted? Probably, And Kevin Rudd was in the audience. He got roasted by accident. That someone brought him up and Trump was like, yeah, I hate you too, and all this shit. So, what are you going to do? You're going to freeze, especially if you're Albo. You're nowhere near as sharp as he is. Exactly. So, and I think there was a lot of times where he could have pressed Trump. There was a lot of times Albanese, this was crazy to me. There was a lot of times Albanese, Trump would talk, he would say something, the media would listen. Albanese would go to add on to it at the end, and the media wouldn't even care. Albanese would be talking, and all the media are just screaming over him, trying to get a word in on Trump. And Albanese should have gone, hey, I'm talking, I'm trying to respond to your question, and stood up for himself, but he just let it go. Yeah. And there were periods in that meeting where Trump's just talking the whole time. There was periods in that meeting where Trump was just talking about stuff that had nothing to do with Australia. He was talking about how he supposedly solved all these conflicts overseas and blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Literally just the classic campaign. Yeah. He was even talking about how, like, you know, Afghanistan have stolen all you know, when Biden was president, they took all the military equipment. Stuff he's been talking about for years. Stuff he was saying in the campaign. You know, nothing to do with Australia.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're Albanese, you kind of have to... And, you know, we don't know what's said behind closed doors. We don't know what's said with the meeting, this and that. But I feel like, you know, this was sort of just to talk about this rare earth minerals deal, which is probably all that the US cares about. You know, cares about anyway, because that's the US. That's a big problem for the US. China have a monopoly on those rare earth minerals for batteries, EVs, all that shit is a terrible thing for the US, because they don't want to, you know, be in a situation where they potentially go to war with China over Taiwan or over whatever, right? And then there's sanctions. There's, you know, it could get messy, you know, and for a big tech fueled economy that is only being bolstered up by AI, like you know, the American empire is right now, you know, a big chip shortage out of China because, you know, they've halted exports there because of whatever reason is not a good thing. So, you know, to open Australia up to more funding, to more infrastructure, to build out our processing plants for these rare earth minerals that go into lithium batteries, etc., is a smart idea for both parties, and gives us some pieces on the board that we can use in this giant geopolitical game that we're playing. But, you know, nothing of note, nothing that is fun to discuss, nothing that, you know, could impact you or me. You know, it's one of those ones where, you know, he's in those situations with Trump, you're forced into a corner a little bit. And, you know, if you're an Australian citizen, you probably go, look, that meeting went pretty well. We saw what happened to the South African Prime Minister when he went over there. He was talking about, you know, is there a genocide of white farmers? And the South African Prime Minister was saying no, blah, blah, blah. And then Trump was like, pull up the footage of all this stuff, and it was like Jerry Springer. It was like, you know, here's the lie. This is why you're lying. This is it. And, you know, not to say that that's wrong, or, you know, people shouldn't be called out for literally coming to the White House and lying to the president of the United States. Like, I'm not saying that he's in the right or wrong, but that's, you know, Trump was freaking grabbing Zelensky by the neck and shaking him in the Oval Office, right?
Oh, exactly.
It's an intimidating meeting for these people coming over to the White House, and, you know, for Albanese, I'm sure it's much the same. So you look, that's all I have to say about that meeting. Yeah. Not much to talk about, but a few things to take away, and that mineral deal overall, I think, is a good thing. Carl?
Basically, two things that didn't really matter too much for us.
No.
Like,
and if you're Australia, I know. Because Trump's on this campaign, he wants to increase the military spending of the Western world, because he believes that the United States bears too much of the financial burden of our protection and our security. And to some extent, that's true. If China was to launch a full-scale invasion of Australia right now, we would lean heavily on the US to defend ourselves. And without the US, it's likely that we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves. So there is a point in that. And the US is sort of, even though, you know, they've been in some terrible, like, you know, military campaigns in the Middle East, which I think are, you know, not good, and they shouldn't have been involved in anyway, they are seen as the protectors of the world a little bit. And the US's army and their funding of NATO has you know, led to the world that we currently live in. You know, look at what's going on in Ukraine, Russia, etc. So and Trump doesn't want that. He wants, this is why it's so tricky, because it's like Trump, it's not that Trump wants no war. Trump wants certain things to be in place. He still wants weapons manufacturers to be able to sell their weapons to overseas nations. It's just that he doesn't necessarily want the American taxpayer or America as a whole paying for it. And that's the sort of situation we're seeing right now. So
exactly.
Look, we'll see what happens. More on this to come. But I did want to, you know, while we are on politics a little bit, while we are talking about Albanese, what has been front of mind for, I guess, Australians over the last month, especially young Australians, in my opinion, has been this new 5% deposit for home loans that's come out recently. Obviously, this was a big talking point in the Australian election recently, but I actually wanted to break down what that really looks like for people our age, for people that want to buy a home, couple of examples, and what that really means. So we're talking about the first home buyer scheme, people. We're talking about what it really looks like in reality to buy a home, to finance it, what the startup costs are, and what it really looks like. So first of all, when acquiring a home, you've got multiple components, right? So you've obviously got the house price, We've looked this up before on the show. The median house price in Sydney is now $1.5 million, and we will do an example on that. But you could also find an apartment for, let's say, $800K, which we'll also do an example for. So let's take those as some of our starting prices. And then you've obviously got the deposit. This is if you're getting a mortgage, which 99% of Australians would be getting a mortgage. And if you are doing it through this new first home buyer scheme, not that the first home buyer scheme is new, but this new refreshed version of the first home buyer scheme with the 5% deposit and everything else we're going to talk about today, then in that case, you only have to owe a 5% deposit to the bank, which is, far less than the traditional 20, 15, 10% deposits required in the future. And as you may notice, these deposits seem to be shrinking in size. Before you needed 20%, then you needed 15, 10, 5. For single parents, now it's 2 under this new deal, 2%, if you're a single parent. And so, look, it only seems to be going down. That's interesting. More on that later. But that's one component. Then we've got stamp duty, another upfront cost, state government, land tax, essentially, as you're all aware of, and LMI, lender's mortgage insurance, which you owe the bank, which is essentially 2 to 3% of the overall property value for a $1.5 million home. That's going to be 40 grand that you owe to the bank. With these, with the first home buyers program right now, there are LMI and stamp duty exemptions, and we're going to go through them right now. So Carl's got this on the screen. This is the LMI exemptions I wanted to go through. But the thing is, it's got a price cap. So if you're looking to buy a property, you can get waived your LMI expense, which can save you tens of thousands of dollars. LMI is typically like, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand, depending on the price of your property, right? However, if you're buying the property in Sydney and it's less than $1.5 million or equals to $1.5 million, then LMI is going to be waived. You don't have to pay it. Perfect, right? Now let's have a look at stamp duty. And then, for people living interstate, I don't know if any interstate viewers here sorry, just 1 second, Carl, go back up to the LMI. For anyone interstate, it's much lower. And this is just based on house prices, average house prices in the cities. And you can see there a pretty good spread and a pretty good depiction of what it looks like and how expensive Sydney is. Expensive, 1.5 for Sydney. Melbourne, 950K. And the next highest is Brisbane at 1 million, ACT at 1 million as well. ACT seems a bit high, but we'll let them do what they need to do. Yeah. Onwards to stamp duty, Carl. Let's have a look at what the exemptions are for here. So what do we got here? New South Wales, full exemption. If your house is less than 800K, full exemption from stamp duty. Stamp duty, another big pain in the ass, which you'll see in a minute. Another 50, 60, 70, 80K out the door, depending on the value of your home. Full exemption if your property is less than 800K, right? Which, as we'll talk about, there's becoming less and less properties for less than 800K. 800K is, we talked about the median house price being 1.5. It's, 800K, that's sort of a number of the past, but we'll talk about that as well. And then there's a bit of a concession range, 800K to $1 million. You don't get full exemption from stamp duty, but you might get 10 grand off, 20 grand off, a huge help in the long run. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at an 800K apartment and a $1.5 million house, compare the pair. What are you actually paying? How much do you need to earn per year to afford these homes? And, sort of understand in my opinion, sort of the failings of this policy just by the numbers. That's what we're doing today. When we're talking about this thing, because in my opinion, there's been a lot of talk about, is this what we should be doing? Does this benefit, older Australians who have maybe had opportunity to access property? Does it, there's been a lot of opinion pieces written about it, but I just want to talk about the facts today. And that's what we're going to do. So go down to the next page, Carl. I want to have a look at this 800K apartment first. So 800K apartment, that is very reasonable for someone. You're right, Carl, right? If we were trying to invest in a property, even if we were trying to rent-vest, meaning that we were maybe living at home, but we wanted to get into the property market, rent it out for somebody else, a tenant to live in, and hopefully cover the mortgage with that rent, positively gear it, neutrally gear it, negatively gear it, write it off on your tax, like we were talking about with Larac last episode, right? This is a very real possibility for people our age, and that's why I want to break it down. 800K apartment, you only need a 40K deposit, right, from the bank these days. 5% deposit, right? That is crazy, right? 40K you know, for people our age, for some people our age, 40K isn't a lot of money. For some people our age, 40K is out of reach entirely. But if we're talking about, you know, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, 40K for, you know, the biggest investment of your life potentially isn't too much, you know, in comparison to what we've seen in, you know, very recent history. You know, 10, 15 years ago, even, you know, especially before the GFC, it wasn't uncommon for house deposits to be, you know, much higher than that. So, okay. Now let's go through these individual tickets, which can add up really quickly. Stamp duty, fully exempt because the property's 800K, right? Which we covered before. LMI, fully exempt because that property is also under the $1.5 million mark that we were discussing before, right? So the loan amount is 760K. There's no add-ons on top of that. Your upfront cost is only 40K, but this is what your loan repayments look like, right? Your monthly repayment is $4,655, and using the 30% rule, the 30% rule being that 30% of your income should be dedicated to your mortgage repayments. That means theoretically you would want to be earning an average income of $186,000 a year to be able to afford this type of mortgage. These days, a lot of Australians are spending way much more on their housing than 30% of their income. I think I was reading a study the other day that it's closer to 55, 60%, especially for young Australians, right? So we're talking double the 30% rule, right? For, you know, 60%. So, you know, people are definitely taking out loans like this who are earning a lot less than $186,000. Because keep this in mind, we're talking about an $800,000 property and $186,000 salary. That puts you in what? That'd have to be the top 10. You'd think top 10 in Australia, Carl. 186,000. Ask what ChatGPT thinks. I would like to see this because I think it's close. Top 10% has to be close for $106,000. That is just shy of the top tax bracket. Yeah. So there should be some data on this. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say. Hey, look at that. The top 10% of earners make $145,000 a year. So we're talking about, okay, this is perfect, right? This is absolutely perfect because we were saying that most people, the 30% rule, we can't apply today because housing's just too expensive. It's become more of an expense for people than it ever has been before. People are spending 50, 60% of their income on rent or mortgage repayments these days. So if you're just in the top 10%, if you just skim in there, if you're making $145,000 a year and decide to take out this loan for that, you know, 80K place, so 800K place, this is the position that you'd be in. And yes, it's a good deal. You only have 40K up front. Your mortgage repayments are $4,655. You know, your upfront cost is nothing. You get a lot of waivers with this program, right? But this is for the top 10%. This is for the top 10%. And we haven't even gotten to the $1.5 million home yet. We're talking about we're talking about the cheap option, right? Yeah. So look, $155K a year, that makes sense to take out that loan. And go back to the Prezzo, sorry, Carl, just 1 second. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can see here, because this is being modest and saying 186,000. Let's say that we're stretching the budget a little bit. We've only got $145,000 to work with, but as we just saw, we're still doing pretty well. We're still in the top 10%. You know, that's the game we're playing. And it's a good deal if you're in the top 10%. If you're making 145K, it makes a lot of sense. Yes, you're going to get stretched. Yes, you're going to owe a lot of money. Yes, it's going to be an investment. But with the way housing's gone in this country, it's been one of the biggest generators of, you know, wealth for the, you know, middle class in Australia. And, you know, so why not get in? And if you are making $145,000 a year and you don't have an 800K apartment that, you know, and this doesn't have to be, as you just saw, the restrictions are far less in other places in Australia. This could be in Brisbane. This could be in Tassie. This could be in Adelaide. This could be in Perth, wherever, right? This is a great deal. You know, a small deposit, Rates are coming down, so maybe, maybe not now, but maybe in the next couple of years, this makes a lot of sense for even someone like myself. And as we were talking about, rent vesting is a good idea if you're willing to still live at home and rent vest it out and try and get some neutral gear from that at least would be awesome. And that's becomes a possibility in other Sydneys outside of Sydney more respectively. So okay, now let's break it down to the $1.5 million house. So what we've got here is the $800K apartment, $1.5 million house. And, this is sort of what I wanted to touch on too, that the first home buyer scheme, just in the name of it, is a bit of a scam because it has nothing to do with homes. It's got everything to do with apartments because as we just saw, these schemes only apply to houses under $800K, under $1 million, under 1.5, depending on what city you live in and depending on what exemption we're talking about. So when it comes to homes that are going to be more than $1.5 million, the median house price in Sydney is $1.5 million. So, at least half the homes are more than that. What about those, right? Are they off limits for first home buyers? I guess so. But, if we're going to talk about the first home buyers scheme, where the real savings seem to be on these cheaper apartments. So let's break it down. $1.5 million house. We've got that $75,000 deposit. So, as you could expect, still a cheap deposit in the grand scheme of things, especially for a $1.5 million house. That's, giant investment. So to be able to lock in something like that for $75K, that's huge. So, and then, okay, problem with this house though, $1.5 million, you got to pay stamp duty. And as you can see on this $1.5 million house, $67,000. So think about how important it is to save that on that $800K place, right? So, and then this just sneaks in to LMI being waived, right? So you get a good deal on there because in Sydney, $1.5 million, that gets waived. And then the loan amount would be $1,425,000, and your monthly repayment is now $8,726 a month. But this is the most alarming. And Carl, I can see Carl looking at this number already and making faces. You need to make $350K to live there, folks. You have to make $350K a year to afford the median house price in Australia. Carl, what we should do is we should also pop into the ChatGPT. If you were to make $350K a year, what top 1% that puts you in of Australians? Look that up for the fans, Carl. $350K, what fractile are you at the top when it comes to Australia? I would love to see that. At $350K a year, you're roughly in the top 1% of income earners in Australia. The top 1% cutoff is around $280 to $300K a year. Wow. So you're more. You're
over.
You're in the top 1%. And as we said before, this is being modest. Go back to the housing preso, Carl.
Oh, yeah.
So as we said before, this is being modest and we're doing that 30% equation. But, even if we're bumping it up to 40, 50%, and we're talking about a, $250K, $300K salary, trying to stretch that to be able to afford this $1.5 million home, it's not possible. So one income is not going to be able to solve that problem for the $1.5 million house. It's got to be a dual income sort of situation. Because you're either in the top 1% individually or as a couple, you're able to afford it. So, that's obviously an option, right? Too. And that should be taken into account as well. But I wanted to show people what it really looks like. If you're buying, that's how crazy it is, guys. Yeah. If you're our age, trying to take out trying to buy your first home, and I'm not I'm not saying that I'm in a position to do this or even any of my friends are in a position to do this, but just think about being in a position to do this in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and you are splitting the income required with a significant other. $350K, where's that coming from? People, we just looked it up. That's the top 1% for people.
That's the top 1%. And then those people that are in the top 1%, they lose half of it. Tax.
Yes, exactly. Right? Exactly. So, but it's incredible. It's incredible.
It's crazy.
And so you go, okay, the first home buyer scheme, as we saw with the $800K apartment, is a good deal for some people. If you're making decent money and you're able to finance that sort of a loan and you only have to do a $40K startup cost, that's a good deal. So that means that the, accessibility to property goes up for some people. But only in the short term. It only becomes accessible for people right now who take advantage of this right now before prices go up again, programs potentially change, deposit amounts go down. Now you need a 1% deposit, now you need a 2% deposit, whatever happens, right? Wherever this housing bubble goes, wherever this inaffordability problem that we have perpetually going on, wherever this inevitably leads to, and we've hinted about this on the show before, about how this is, we've talked about how there's genuine potential here to have a residential debt collapse in Australia. Like, we have more residential debt, household debt than any other country per capita in the world. Absolutely. So, the average Australian is overloaded with giant mortgage, giant personal debt. And, this could manifest in terrible problems in the future. And that's not like some woo-woo theory. It's like a basic chain of events need to happen. If property prices collapse, if the market goes one way or the other, it's just things could happen that could throw us out of whack, and we're so over leveraged that there's nothing we can do about it. And that is a big problem that this doesn't solve. This doesn't, we're pointing out that if you are in our generation, you are, willing to hop on and, miss some of the stamp duty, miss some of the LMI, hop in while you can. Now might be a good time. But when we're talking about the general population, when we're talking about, the future of this country and the future of the housing crisis, this might be taking a little bit of heat off right now for a few people, but for everyone else, it's just stoking it up more and keeping the machine running, keeping the machine on, and keeping prices high. Yeah. So, and we've talked about this on the show before as well, how that, because the government always come out and they say, yes, we know it's not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. We're trying to address both sides of the issue. But on the supply side, nothing much is happening there either. They're trying to build all these new homes. Every 6 months, they come out and say, we're really behind. We're falling behind. Construction is going as the way we want. The weather's not good. Whatever their excuse is for these properties not being constructed as quick as they want them to, it's just the reality of the situation. So you go, look what more needs to be done. Because as we've already seen, it's already to the extent where the top 1% afford the median house price, right? And that 800K apartment, you have to be making at least more than 3 figures a year, which very few Australians are able to access. So you go, okay, just who exactly are these schemes for? Are they for people who are already relatively well off to get a foot into the property market, while people who can't even talk about these figures are still living paycheck to paycheck, paying inexorbitant amounts for rent? So, and so you go, okay, am I living in this giant simulation where this is just some bullshit scheme to keep property prices high? Because as we just did the numbers now, it's not gonna help average people. It's not gonna help first home buyers, genuine people who are looking to start a family and are riding this cost of living crisis like all of Australia, all of the world really is right now. So here we are, playing the game again. It feels like we're on the round to go, like the merry-go-round a little bit with this. And in the next election in 2028, I wouldn't be surprised if we're hearing 1% deposit, no deposit, some crazy
give it to you.
And this is, and that what are we doing? What do we do? Are we just going? We just are going down the rabbit hole of more and more sketchy financial products. That's what it is. Exactly. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And I work for a bank. I understand at least a little bit about this. A mortgage that has a 20% deposit attached to it and a guarantee and doesn't have all these first home schemes attached to it and all these exceptions, right, is far less risky than a loan that does. And, I think this is another thing that people don't understand as well. This stamp duty, this LMI, these exemptions, this 5% deposit, this isn't just going away. The government didn't just snap their fingers and make it go away. They're
recycling.
No. They're responsible for this. They have to pay the LMI. They're subsidizing this. They're subsidizing the stamp duty that's going to the state government. And the state governments are making less money than they were, so the government's having to step in and subsidize that. Who's paying for that? You and me. So this is a state-funded program. We should have decision in where our money goes. We should be able to criticize where the programs are essentially just benefiting people that already own assets and aren't doing anything for the average person.
Digging a hole.
Exactly, and the average person is paying the bulk of the tax. So here we are. What else are we gonna do? What else am I gonna say? I've shown the numbers. I've told you what I thought. I don't see any other argument but this one. I've told you that there is benefits to this. There is a good deal if you have the money and you are willing to capitalize on it right now. But overall for Australia, I don't see this as a good thing. And I think, and this is the thing, and we are just talking about the Albanese Trump address. This is the thing that I like about Trump. At least to an extent, he's accountable for the things that he does and the policies that are enacted, because he literally faces the media every day. If he breathes, if he does something, if a bill's going to get passed, he has 100 people on him all the time asking him questions. And he, to an extent, goes out there and answers them for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours every day, and gives, the people his version of the truth, and, and gives people information. I don't see that from the Australian government. We don't see big breakdowns of these policies and what it really means and who is exempt and how to access these things. Because I'm sure if people are even still listening to this show, I'm sure that we told you stuff about this that you didn't know before. You might not have even known what LMI is or stamp duty or any of this stuff is. Maybe you didn't know the exemption brackets. Maybe you didn't know about the first home buyer scheme at all. But that's the thing. People don't know. People don't know that you can put aside money into your super account. You can, have concessions into your super and use that money as a deposit on your home. And that money that you put into super obviously isn't liable to get taxed, or is to get taxed at a lower rate. So it's but there's a million schemes. There's a million things that the government are doing to try and make housing more affordable for younger Australians, which I think is good. However, one, people don't even know about it. And two, it's not accessible to young Australians. It's not affordable. It's only affordable to the people that already have money. And that's all I got to say. That's it.
but that's the problem, right? Because like at the end of the day, like you're kind of just digging yourself so deep with this little like deposit that you're putting in that you basically be far better off like having, as you said, 20%, so much less risky, even just for the bank and how they're covering it, with the fact that the monetary system is already not good in the fact that everything is fiat. Like it's all just, like kind of, it's basically just, the system is perfectly designed that you can kind of create money, fake value almost, kind of push like all the, what's that big one with the, it's a big buzzword for how they kind of print money.
Oh, quantitative easing.
Yeah, that's what they do. Yeah, quantitative easing. And it's all that sort of stuff.
Our favorite on this show.
Exactly.
Quantitative easing. You know how much I love quantitative easing. Oh. If I love quantitative easing so much, a lot of my money's in Bitcoin. Well, quantitative easing has actually made me a lot of money, because I know this sounds crazy, but okay, for people that don't know, quantitative easing is when the government, the Fed, the Reserve Bank of Australia, et cetera, print more money. And in COVID, they did a bunch of this. When you print more money, you obviously have huge inflation. But also what happens is when you print more money, things that are genuine stores of wealth increase because the money's worth less. Exactly. Right? So things like gold, things like silver, things like Bitcoin, which a lot of people describe as digital gold, whether you believe that to be true or not, in the last, post-COVID era, Bitcoin's gone from being 18,000 to 118,000. So, does that go to show the strength of Bitcoin, or does that go to show the weakness of the US dollar? And does that have to go to show the weakness of the fiat system? And I think that's why people are pretty bullish on crypto. A lot of people talk about, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and crypto doesn't exist and all this bullshit. But I think at the end of the day, that's the simple problem that I'm looking to address. I'm looking to address how come 40% of the US monetary supply in the world was printed in the last 2 years. How come quantitative easing seems to be the thing that we turn to time after time after time to bail out banks in the GFC, to bail out governments during the COVID-19 pandemic. And, this situation, the US debt situation, the fiat situation, I guess, at the moment is, starting to deteriorate. In my opinion, gold's the highest it's ever been. Bitcoin's the highest it's ever been. And, I think the writing's on the wall for a lot of people. And I think people are starting to move out of traditional assets and into things that are a little bit more genuine stores of wealth. And that's why we're seeing such a rise in these things.
Yeah, like where we started, where obviously gold coins was basically where we started. Legit gold coins. Then they started putting silver in them.
Yep, and now they're made of copper, and now they're made of, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
I haven't seen a coin in 4 years. Yeah. I haven't seen a coin since I was a child. It feels like I've just been on freaking double tap pay for my whole life. I don't know what the perfect solution is to that. I don't know if it's gold. I don't know if it's Bitcoin. I don't know if it's something else. I don't know if the collapse of the fiat system just leads to the collapse of civilization as we know it. And it doesn't matter about Bitcoin and gold because you're not going to be able to go down to the Perth Mint anyway because no one's going to have any food, right? So, who knows what that situation looks like. But look, that's it for today's episode. This has been a lot of fun. We could go on for ages. We could talk about freaking Trump invading Venezuela now and all that garbage. We could talk about the ceasefire in Gaza and how terribly that's going and how it's kind of dead in the water, that ceasefire. But, for now, it's still holding, but there's been some things going on. Look, we'll talk about it another time. Let's get out of here. It was good to see you all, and we'll catch you next time.